Tuesday's a busy day. Isn't it?
It is a busy day. That's okay. It's part of the job.
Oh, I ran into somebody at the park who was telling me about benediction on Sunday.
Yeah, we just started that again today since COVID.
You just started it again?
Yeah.
So you saying the Divine Mercy Chaplet in the morning after the 8 a.m. Mass?
Well, usually we do Our Mother Perpetual Help.
That's it.
Right. Divine Mercy's on Tuesday night, so it'll be after
I'm
this.
sorry. Yeah, I meant Perpetual
Yeah.
Help. And then benediction at night. And it
Benediction
starts
night.
at 7? No.
Well, the exposition starts at 2, and then we have benediction at 7.
Okay, so 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
So the church is open for adoration from 2 to 7. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, it's actually open every day.
Yeah, but I
so-
mean, you got the monstrance exposed.
Right. Exposition. Right.
And is that going to be every Tuesday?
It's going to be every first Tuesday. So basically, the way this works is we have that, and then we come over here, and then we go back over for Divine Mercy at 9. So they'll have a Divine Mercy after this at 9 o'clock.
Is that still with the Acts group and the portico?
I believe so. Yeah.
Under the portico?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. Trying to get the.
The X group in the portico is that's the rosary on Thursday. Though.
That's right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Was that Thursdays or?
I thought it was
Yeah,
Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, you're right. Acts is
Thursday at 9
Find
o'clock.
my Zoom
Yes.
link here.
Okay.
I used to drive home from work, and I always come in that way on the alley, and it was always blocked.
Here we go.
But now that Robert Lindsay's gone, who's running that show? Do you know?
I don't know that anybody really ran it. I mean, I know occasionally they'd go to somebody's house afterwards. Bob used to host it quite a bit, but I think we'll go to his house. I know Dennis Muller's almost always there, from what I understand.
He's a good guy.
There's
What is
several.
it,
right
Dennis
there.
too?
Bowler.
Bowler.
Yeah.
I don't know him.
Oh yeah, you would know him if you saw him. You would know exactly. They used
Yes.
to sit in front of us when our older kids were really little. They have 3 kids, and their son Kevin passed away a couple years ago.
Oh,
Steven.
yeah.
Oh, that's his name? I never
Or is
knew
it
that.
Kevin?
Steven.
Okay, Steven.
Steven.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, right in front of the university. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
They had
right.
2 boys and a girl.
Right around Christmas.
Yeah, that's tragic.
Okay. Now we're cooking.
She's got white hair. You would recognize her.
I see him at Mass
Your
his kids are
whose
grown.
kids were in grade school when our kids were babies.
when they were born.
Okay.
They
All
were
right.
supposed
I
to
think
know
we're
how
up and
kids
running.
use.
Before we begin, does anyone need anything to drink, or we do have like soda and water inside if anyone needs anything?
I have water. Girls, if
No.
you want some
You want
water,
water?
want water?
No,
Should be okay for now.
Granny. We ate dinner before.
Okay, great. All right. Let's begin with a prayer. All right, in your Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Mighty God, as we engage in this conversation tonight, challenge us, help us to understand your will when it comes to Catholic anthropology, the nature of humanity, and your will for the sacraments. Strengthen us, guide us. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So those of us who are coming to these things kind of have an understanding of how this goes. So it's really more of an open discussion. So I kind of throw these topics out, and really the focus is not so much to talk about what the church teaches, because I think a lot of times people know. It's really more about why the church teaches what she does. So tonight is sort of a controversial topic, I would think. Maybe not so much controversial anymore, but it has been over the years and probably will remain a controversial topic, is why can't 2 people of the same sex get married? So I thought this was actually kind of a good topic because last month we kind of talked about what marriage was, the sacrament of marriage, what that entails. And really tonight we're going to focus on the matter of the sacrament. So those of you last week or maybe watched online, who can tell me what the matter of the sacrament of matrimony is? So we always have 4 things we need for a sacrament, right? Matter, form, recipient, minister.
We're learning.
So what makes the sacrament of matrimony so unique is that 3 of those things are the same thing. So like for the Eucharist, right? The matter is bread and wine, right? Wheat bread, grape wine. The form is the words that tell you what the matter is doing. So when the priest says, this is my body, this is my blood, That is the essential form of the sacrament, saying what is happening there to the bread and wine, right? The minister would be, in this case, a priest or a bishop. It can be a deacon. And then the recipient would be anyone who is in a state of grace, that's baptized, right? That's the Eucharist. Every sacrament, like very tangible as the matter. There's a recipient who usually is a clergyman, except for baptism. That's the only time that it really doesn't apply. The recipient is always some kind of form of the faithful, and the form are always the words. So in most sacraments, it's pretty clear what those things are. Confession, that's a little less clear. It's not as tangible, right? Because the matter there is contrition, not necessarily like a tangible thing. It's I'm sorry for my sins. That's the matter of the sacrament, right? But with matrimony, the recipient, the minister, and the matter are all the same.
For the spouses.
The spouses, the bride and the groom. So the man and the woman, right, are the matter, as well as the ministers, as well as the recipients of the sacrament. So why is a priest there? A witness, right? He's just there basically providing the form. We talked about last time was the form of the rite, not the form of the sacrament, the form of the rite, right? And so it's really there as a witness. In the Eastern Church, it's a little different. You actually need a priest or a bishop there. That's required for validity. With the Roman Catholics, we're like, really it's two people that are sharing the common priesthood that are giving the sacrament to each other. So really what we're talking about tonight is the matter, right? It has to be a bride and a groom, meaning a biological born male and a biological born female. Now about, 50 years ago, that wasn't too controversial. Nowadays, it gets a little more complicated, okay? So based on what we talked about, why do you guys think two men or two women cannot be married? So we remember the ends of marriage, right? Okay, yeah, Pat, you got something? Right, so the goal that we all have with every marriage is the ends of the marriage, right? So the unitive aspect, which is good, the sacramental, which is really the most important thing, and then the procreative, right? So obviously, if you have two men and two women, they can't procreate, right? They cannot have children naturally, and the way God ordained for humanity, right? There's a complementarity between men and women. It's not just biological; it's also emotional, intellectual. That man and woman, they complete each other in that sense, right? The way that two men can't and two women really can't. So I think a lot of the controversy kind of harbors around this whole word in the Catechism, which talks about disorder. So when I say the word disordered, what do you guys think about?
Entropy.
Entropy? Okay. In what sense?
Heat, things not moving towards an end, loss of function, inability to do work.
Right.
Chaos, like ADHD, like you can't focus, you can't move towards an end.
Yeah, and that's a very scientific term, right? When we talk about entropy, we talk about heat transfer, right? Thermodynamics, where there's basically what that's talking about, the second law of thermodynamics, that everything basically goes to a natural point, to natural end, right? So if you raise the temperature on something, eventually that temperature will go back to the ambient, what they call the ambient temperature, right? The surrounding temperature, right? And vice versa. When we talk about disorder here, we're not talking about a scientific term. And that's I think, what gets kind of confused sometimes. A lot of people with disorder, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that's a psychological term. A disorder, psychological disorder, right? And up until about, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that to actually experience same-sex attraction, homosexual tendencies, was considered to be a psychological disorder, right? But in the Catechism, disorder is not necessarily a technical term. Well, I shouldn't say a scientific term. It's a philosophical term, right? And all that it means in the Catechism is that something that's not ordered to its natural end, right? And that's kind of what we get from that, right? It's like entropy is also a idea that God ordained a certain way of things happening. outside of that realm would be considered disorder. So a lot of people think, well, wait a minute, isn't there some way science can like come in and like, let's say you have a man and a woman who cannot have children for whatever reason, right? They can't have kids. So wouldn't that be disordered? God's plan, there's no procreative act, or no procreation that come from it. Right? How do you think we would answer that? Well, yeah, so let's say you have a infertile couple, whether it be the man or the woman, right? They can't meet that end of procreation. Yeah. Right. So as we talked about last time, right, is that just a procreative act is not necessarily natural, right? So let's say like a priest, right, or a sister, their relationship with the church and with Jesus can be procreative, right? It gives hope. It gives a feeling, a life to their spiritual children. So when a couple comes together, when people see that couple, they're not just saying that, oh, that's a great couple. They represent Christ and his church and the love and the fruitfulness that comes from that, right? A spiritual procreation. Now, some people may argue, well, then, but two men can probably do that same thing, or two women can do that same thing. What do you think?
Well, it seems like they do. And I mean, I've worked with people, they tell me, well, I've known I was a homosexual since I was 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
They knew from the very beginning.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really perplexing.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, there's two ways of looking at that, right? So Thomas Aquinas talks about potentiality and actuality, right? So for a married couple that can't have kids, let's say there's some natural issue or whatever, some biological, there's still the potential to have children, right? That even if they can't actually have kids, I mean, like maybe the sperm count's low, maybe there's something wrong with the woman's, reproductive organs, that's not releasing eggs properly, whatever it may be, or like something that's periods of infertility, whatever it may be, there's still potential to have kids, right? There's always going to be that potential. You say no. Why do you say no? Well, just because they can't have kids now doesn't mean they don't have the potential to have kids. Okay. Well, so let's put it this way.
lots of diagnoses are wrong.
Yeah. Right. So that goes back. That's a good point. So let's go back to Genesis. Right. You guys know how Abraham and Sarah were when they actually had Isaac?
99 and 100.
Yeah. There's been stories all
Not
throughout.
young.
Even Samson, his parents were very, very
Yeah,
old.
very old.
John the Baptist, their parents were past the age of actually having kids. So there's always the opportunity for God to work within that life to actually bring about that procreation. So in other words, there's always a chance for a miracle in that respect, right? But God always works within the natural capability of humanity, right? That's not to say he can't work outside of it, but he puts a process in motion for humanity to follow that's directed towards a certain end. So even if a couple is not, let's say they're infertile, right? God can still work with that and give them a child through that. And there's examples that even like today, you always hear about infertile couples that they pray, they go through maybe natural family planning process, and they find that they have kids, right? So there's always that potential to have children between a man and a woman that you can't have with two men, and you can't have two women, right?
So there's no potential.
Right. Right. So two men can't have a child. Just naturally that can't happen. Right. Two women, same way. But even if a man and woman are infertile, they can still potentially have a child. Right. That's kind of what it comes down to. No, because like we talked about before, right? That even between a man and a woman, there's a spiritual aspect of that that's life-giving. So if a man and woman are married, they're representing Christ and his church. That is a life-giving bond, a covenant, right? That if you look upon them, that gives you hope. Well, so that's what we're getting into. Let's get them. So that's not to say that two men or two women can't have a friendship that's loving, right? But Augustine talks about levels of friendship. Okay, So there's a level of friendship that is utilitarian. You ever hear about that? Do you guys know what that means? Yeah. Well, let's
Sort
say.
of.
Well, here's a good
It
example.
can.
Let's say you have a coworker, right? That you guys you're friends with a coworker that you really only see them though at work, right? You may hang out a little bit after work, maybe go to a bar or whatever, but for the most part, your relationship is based on where you're working, professional, right? So if you were to move to another job well, maybe that friendship doesn't happen anymore, right? It's not that you're really you basically have a common goal that you're working towards, that you find that friendship in that, right? Then there's friendships of leisure, right? No, not necessarily pleasure, but let's say I have a friend that we love baseball. We go to baseball games together. We always watch the Cardinals together. But really, that's the extent of our friendship, right? Then Augustine talks about a friendship that is basically as if it were another you, right? That you see yourself in a person, and really it's directed for the good of that other, right? That you want the best things for that person, right? Now, that would be kind of that's the highest form of friendship, and that's where you can see probably where two men or two women can have that friendship, right? That I as a man could have a friend of mine that's my best friend. I want the best thing for him because I almost say I see another self in that person, right? That's different though than the matrimonial bond, right? Because the matrimonial bond is a complete self-gift to the other. That I as a man, she as a woman, we're giving ourselves to each other completely. Intellectual, emotionally, physically, right? Well, because again, we're looking at the ends of the marriage, right? And what the goods of marriage actually are, right? Which are, it's we need to become one flesh in a way that a man and woman just can't do it, right? They can't become one new being because they don't complement each other in that way, right? In other words, women have something to them that completes a man, and vice versa.
Like two North Poles.
Yeah.
Trying to put two North Poles together.
But also the fact that the man and the woman, there can be a child that comes from that bond, right? Where a child can't come from man. Yeah, but adoption is different than actually having your own child. Adoption is a good practice, is a great thing to do, right? Every child deserves a home, right? Now, we would go as far as saying that every child deserves a mother and a father, right? A mother and a father. Because there's gifts that a mother has that a father doesn't, and there's gifts that a father had that his mother doesn't. Well, what we're saying is you can't necessarily have the qualities of a mother as a man.
No.
Right? Well, oftentimes the quality of a mother is not only like physically, but also like nurturing, right?
How many times a day does mom tell you I love you? And how many times a day does dad tell you he loves you? He shows you he loves you, but I tell you. It's a complimentary.
So there's ways that so there are ways that a man can show love that a woman doesn't, and vice versa, right?
Something I struggle with is the biology behind it. You know, because I think of a man has a Y and a woman, or an X and a Y, and a woman has an X and an X.
Mm-hmm.
But you talk about this whole formation of a new being, and you know, now we realize that genes are not so simple as this chromosome and that chromosome. There's a lot of crossover that happens in genes that swap from one chromosome to another. So you have people that have Y traits on other chromosomes and they're being expressed, and vice versa. You know, you have men who are lacking. How do you handle that? Well, genetically, what are they?
I think that kind of goes. I did a little research about this, and that kind of goes. I think more of the scientific aspect. But either way, though, when you're born a man, you do have specific chromosomes that are not present in women, vice versa, right? When you're born a man, you have male chromosomes. When you're born a woman, you have female chromosomes. Now, that's not to say that there couldn't be tendencies towards one or the other, right? So one part of the problem is a lot of this the science has not been completely studied yet. This is relatively new in the life of the scientific study, psychologically, or even through the genome. And so one great book that I really recommend is called Living the Truth in Love. It's by Father Paul Chek. He is the director of the Courage program for the USCCB, and we'll go to that in a little bit later. But in it, there's actually, it's kind of a collection of stories from people who have experienced same-sex attraction in their lives and converted to Catholicism through the Courage program. Then one section of the book talks about the psychological aspect, right? So kind of what you talk about the genetic. Now, at the time when
genetic is different than psychological.
it is,
It's different than like emotions or feelings. It's like you literally have traits that are being expressed that are male or female.
So he does specify when that book was written that there wasn't really data shown.
Okay.
Now in 2019 there was a study, right, looking at like if they could find this, what they call the gay gene, right? Right. So what they found was there were like maybe 5 markers that were shared by about 8 to 25% of people experiencing same-sex attraction. But none of the 5 markers, all 5 markers only shared by less than 1% of those who experienced same-sex attraction. Okay. Right. So there were certain markers that were shared by 8 to 25%, but none of them really, virtually none of them shared all 5 markers.
The primary cause.
Right. Now what
So they didn't find a gene per se.
Right.
Homosexual.
Right. But again, they would even argue that really that data is still not completely fleshed out.
Yeah, this is new.
Right. So what the other psychologists in this so the real question comes down to, is this genetic or is it learned? In other words, do you have a choice in this, or is it something you're predisposed to, right? And right now, all I can tell you is the jury is still out on that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Does the church take an open mind?
No. Yeah, we do. Yeah. We don't. So the church doesn't teach one or the other.
Okay.
Right. But what he argues in this book, there's a psychologist that kind of goes, and what they found, there actually are common factors in the upbringing of a person that have a tendency towards same-sex attraction. So one of those things was, okay, well, you have a non-existent father for a male, right? An overbearing mother for a male, right? And maybe the vice versa for a female. One of the biggest indicators, again, this is not conclusive at all, but one of the biggest indicators that he found in his study was that if a child were being brought up with a lot of friends or influences from the same sex, what tends to happen is, he calls it the exotic becomes erotic. So in other words, is if you're a young male that has all female friends, you're just raised completely by women, and you get to the point of puberty, you may start experiencing the fact that you have that lack of male influence as something that's exotic and then becomes erotic, right? It's something that's desired by the man, right? Again, this is not conclusive, but you add the fact that if maybe this person might advance towards one of his female friends and get rejected by them. That's another kind of, especially at that key moment of puberty, it tends to kind of direct them towards the same-sex attraction route, right?
And how about for women?
Same thing. So if women were kind of brought up around, all women or all men, and they kind of have that tendency towards hanging out with like your Tom, that kind of thing, they kind of then look at, a girl surrounded by all males, and then they start, get that maybe that tomboy phase. The point where they get to puberty, they may start saying, well, this has not been around me in my life. That's something I'm attracted to, right? Again, this is all inconclusive. There's no real hard evidence either way to say this is true or not. But he's just, based on primary studies he's done, this is kind of the data he's looking at. And it's not, again, it's not the same common. It's just there's also different of like depression in the family, drug use. If there already is someone in the family that's experienced, there's a lot of different factors go into that, right? But whether it's a nurture or nature thing, the church doesn't say either way, because we don't know, right? We don't have science to really back it up either. Well, that's what they're trying to figure out. They're saying, well, is there something in your genes that can predispose you a certain way? Right.
That's why the sexuality is considerably more fluid. There are factors within it for sexuality.
Sexuality is what? Fluid.
Well, especially as you're young. You're young, right?
Well, they've done a lot of studies in bisexuals, and then also
identify something, but they would oftentimes. And they discovered essentially, like, a lot of times that you would, at 4
Yes.
years old, you would switch. And
That's true.
Would, but
Yeah.
they just realized most people's sexuality is much more fluid.
Yeah, that's true too. Like there has been studies showed that maybe men could be attracted to another man in certain aspects of that man, but maybe not like a complete giving over himself to that person. I mean, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of different studies that come out, but I think the point is that none of them are conclusive. There has not been really any evidence thrown out like this is really the way it is, right? Because there's always outliers.
Everything hasn't moved in
Exactly.
the same direction.
Right.
Conclusively.
Right.
But we've always had homosexuality. I remember reading Plato and Socrates saying,
Yeah,
he said some really racy
the
things.
Symposium is a very racy document
That was
from Plato, and yeah,
4th century BC.
I mean it's
always
always been around, but the interesting thing about it though is it's never been really societally accepted until really today. So every society that's ever existed always kind of looked at homosexuality as sort of something that may be done, but not necessarily brought to the light. So even the Symposium, when they talk about homosexuality there, I don't know if you ever read the Symposium. Basically, it's Socrates talking about these different aspects of life. What they're really talking about is love. What the best romantic love would be.
what is love?
And so in it, his interlocutors, the people he's talking with, they all have taken young men as like lovers, right? And there's really kind of like, it's not like a big deal, but they're drinking wines, they drink, like their tongues get looser and more of the stuff comes out. But Socrates takes the point, like, that's just not a good thing to do, right? That I don't take a male lover because that's not the way I'm made, right? And it was often thought that taking a lover of the same sex is really like, it's actually almost like a misogynistic thing, where men kind of thought, well, really the men are superior beings, so therefore I should really hang out more with men.
They said something
Yeah.
in there to the effect.
A lot of times in a lot of European countries, homosexuality is illegal. It's not illegal for lesbians to be together because they would consider that, like, for example, in Britain, for long periods of time, it wasn't considered illegal, and the reason why is because they considered it an actual relationship and only.
Yeah. Yeah,
So it's just a physical thing.
No, they claimed that essentially women could not have sex with each other, but only two men could have sex with each other. For males were real sexual relationships, but females could not.
Yeah, a lot of
So lesbians were technically legal even in the rest of it because it wasn't real.
okay, well, so if someone is gay, is that a big problem, right? And the answer to that would be, well, look, God loves you in whatever circumstance you find yourself in, whatever position you are. But I think it's important. What Catholic social teaching always kind of promotes is, first off, we're all called to chastity, right? Now, chastity is different than celibacy, and it's different than like continence, right? So, for instance, most of us here are married, right? You are called still to chastity within your marriage, right? To control your base desires for something higher in your life, right? I'm a celibate, meaning I'm not married, right? I'm so called to chastity within that celibacy, right? It's a gift that I'm given to give back to God, right? Now the difference is that a celibate man has to be incontinent, right? I'm sorry, continent, meaning they can control their passions directed towards that end. Whereas a married couple, they don't necessarily have to be, right? There's a way they can engage in their own act and still maintain their chastity, right? Incontinent, I think in the current lexicon, really is talking more about the control of the bowels, but it's always traditionally been, basically control of your passions. That's what it really comes down to. Your control, self-control. That's what it comes down to, right? And we're all called to that self-control, no matter what state of life that we're actually in. So it's often asked, well, can a gay man become a priest, or can a gay woman? Well, the answer to that is, as long as they can maintain continence, meaning they can have that self-control. Well, sure, but it makes it much more difficult. So it would be the same thing saying, hey, Father Mark, could you go live in a convent for 20 years? Well, I mean, I probably could, right? Would it be more difficult for a man to live with a bunch of women that they're not related to? Yeah. So why would you want to put someone in that situation where they could be tempted in that way, right? So that's what I think that's kind of the key, is that whether you experience same-sex attraction or not, we're all called to that chastity. So people would say, well, wait a minute, why can't two men engage in their act just like a man and woman? And our response is, well, they're called to chastity within their state of life, and they can't engage in the marital act. They can attempt to engage in the marital act, but the marital act is reserved for a man and woman because of that self-gift, that unitive love, that procreative love, that sacramental love that is, by definition, procreative. Yeah.
So I want to such as like talk to like maybe people like act on their attraction stuff. Some people just really
Okay, so I would ask you, would the church consider? Oh, sorry, you're saying sex or sinful?
They're saying, is it the
is
sexual
it
act?
actually, like you got like I've heard teachers tell me that like it's a sin to do it because it is. Then I've also heard others being like, well, it's not actually
Well,
So,
it isn't. So we have to make a little distinction there, right? So it's not the same thing as a marital act, right? It's not the same as a man and woman coming together in the bond of marriage to procreate.
well, it's a man and a woman coming together out of marriage the same.
Okay, are you asking is it sex?
Yes.
Yes. Is it sinful? Yes.
Well, okay, but I've had teachers tell me that it's not because it's not a man.
So I would say that two men and two women come together. They attempt to engage in sex in the marital act, right? It's an attempt. It's almost like a mockery. It would be like masturbation, right? I mean, in a way, it would be, right? Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to simulate a marital act by yourself, which you cannot do,
Yeah,
right?
so with someone
That's
else.
true.
But I don't think they're going to be with like the opposite sex people
Well, I think the overarching theme here is whether it's in the bond of marriage or not.
If your question is it coitus?
Well,
Yeah, yes, it is.
I think, okay, depends on what your definition is. I would say that if you're saying that if you define sex as an act of intercourse, which could possibly bring about children, no, it's not, right?
Yeah.
But if you define sex as a pure act of pleasure, well then yeah, you can say that's sex. Okay, so I think that's the thing, right? If we're talking about a pure act of pleasure, yeah, okay, say that's sex. That's really something that's sacramental. Is it the way God ordained it for humanity? And is it really natural? I would say, well, no, on all, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual, right? Make sense? Okay. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the key here, is that I think a lot of times we try to conflate those things, saying that, well, homosexual sin is just another sin. Okay, but it's still sin, right? If I were to engage or attempt to engage in a marital act with somebody, it'd be sinful for me to do that. And probably even more sinful than anyone else trying to engage in that act, because of the vows I've taken and the life I've given to God, right? So like someone who would cheat on their spouse. Okay, that's a pretty sinful act, right? Is it as sinful as two men trying to engage in the marital act? Well, I mean, it's still mortal sin.
It's not a sin meter.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are various levels of sin, of course, right? But the question is, and again, we also have to kind of, put that in context, that a sin is always defined. There has to be some level of knowledge to it as well. Right? There's an act of the conscience involved. So in other words, someone would have to know that actually would be wrong to do it in some degree. Okay. But yeah, good question. So I think that's sometimes conflated, right? Sometimes people, well, what is that? Well, yeah, if you're talking about debasing someone based on pure pleasure, that would be wrong no matter what. Like, if you want to say it's sex, okay, it's sex, but it still wouldn't be proper. And that's kind of, I think, one of the other issues too that kind of was brought up is that, a lot of times this is all directed towards basically debasing yourself just to your primary parts, right? One of the big problems with same-sex attraction, or at least someone who tries to engage in that act, is that they're reducing the person and themselves down to just their sexuality. When in actuality, we're all more than that. We're a full human person. and should be treated as such. Yeah.
That homosexuality, homosexual sex, or whatever, it still can have levels, but it still is intimacy. Like,
Okay, but you said what?
like
Intimacy?
people can still, for example, value,
Define intimacy.
like, okay, let's say vulnerability, okay? You know, physical vulnerability.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of physical vulnerability. People not, like, for example, like, not all homosexuals can sleep around. I have plenty
True.
of friends who are gay, and they could never sleep.
Yeah. Okay.
They are
Yeah.
insane, like they view sex, from a philosophical sense, as vulnerability.
Okay.
Intimacy. Very
Okay.
it's,
I mean, that's true. That's true, right? But when it comes to sex, what the question is, right? Can it be unitive, procreative, and sacramental?
Okay, but I was just asking, were you saying that it was really based on sexual drive?
I'm saying oftentimes that is the case, right? I mean, you have to admit, we live in a society today that kind of values pleasure over anything else.
Well,
Right?
and I think you'll probably see this with a lot of young people too,
Yeah.
Ronnie, in your classes or people you know through robotics or wherever. There are a lot of people, and it is not about intimacy. It's, and I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying I'm sure you've met people who just do it to do it at that age.
People today are having less sex. So I don't know.
Well,
about
okay.
that.
Well, less
Traditional.
traditional. I think people are still seeking pleasure.
I think people are using different words.
I mean, but I
define
think they
things.
used to as well.
Well, that may be true. I'm sure maybe it's more maybe out in the open now too. But I think also too, as
I think the difference now is society.
that could be true, right?
I
And
don't
also
think anything.
there are, well, I think also too, like in the time of, so I love Saint Augustine. I don't know if you guys know anything about Saint Augustine at all. So he lived a very I don't know, hedonistic life most of his life, up until he was about 30. And I will say that it may be easier for someone to live a more chaste life back then than it may be now. Well, because I think there's more opportunity. I think right. There's less modesty, I think, today than there was back then. Yeah, I think it's all around, right? Yeah. I don't think it's a woman thing. I think it's a man thing too. I think there's a lot of immodesty out there that's kind of, I'll give you a good example. And if my mother's watching right now, I know she'll kill me. But she would advocate, as my sisters would go out for high school, college, right? She would have to show a little skin, right? Try to attract a guy. And it wasn't anything like she was really directed to evil. It was like, hey, let's put on a bikini, go out there. But she was like trying to make them more attractive to the opposite sex. Now,
I don't think they're doing the opposite.
no, I know, I agree.
Yeah.
No, I'm giving you kind of an example of that, right? I don't think it's just a. I'm sorry. What are you saying?
Not necessarily, like maybe in some cases you have to attract the guy or whatever, but sometimes it's just for themselves.
I think the idea that is very misogynistic idea.
I agree.
It's the idea that, I think society a lot of times assumes that when women feel okay with showing their body, they assume it's for them. And I think that's very misogynistic. Women can show their body because they like it.
So I guess the question would be, why are you showing your body?
Well, why not? Why is
Well-
it negative? Well, I mean, for a lot of reasons, a lot of things put women down. I mean, personally, going to a co-ed school for 9 years, I had guys say I was ugly, I was fat, I was called like Lizzo. I was called a lot of things.
I don't know
Guys,
what that means.
she's an artist. She's plus size. Anyway, I was told a lot of things.
Oh,
No
Lizzo
matter
the singer.
Anyway, a lot of things, guys, they never had something positive to say about any of the girls they ever met. There was always something wrong with one of us, with all of us. There was never the perfect girl thing.
So
But anyway, a lot of times women will wear something not because they're trying to get a guy's attention, but because they're oh, that's cute. I like that you wear that.
Okay.
They're self-conscious.
granted, I would say though too, as a guy, right?
Do men do that though?
I don't think they do that.
You wake up and say, "I want to look cute
Wait a
today."
No.
Maybe that's a generation.
But to the point about talking about like guys saying
That has never crossed.
Never crossed my mind.
I would say though,
But
but to that point, I think guys
there are men who
sometimes.
think that, but I don't think most.
Well, I
of
think
us
guys
do.
who make those comments though, Merv, there's something going on within them that actually is really more telling about them than it is about you.
Well, I know, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
So it could be a self-esteem thing, right? Is what I'm trying to say.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Or
I think
just
guys get that
youthful
too. Sure.
insecurity.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's fair. I guess my point though is, what you have to ask yourself: are you reducing yourself to just like a part of? Well,
I mean,
they
some
will
people
claim, but that could be, right?
There's a chance that we're overanalyzing.
Could be. Could be. But I think that's the idea, though, is that if you were today, I think it's much harder to maintain chastity than it would have been back in the 4th century, or the 6th century, or even the 9th century, right? Now we can talk about why that is, or what it may be, whether that's I don't know if that's something the same-sex attraction or not, but I think the fact of the matter is we have a society today that values pleasure above really anything else. And so the question is there something better than pleasure? And I think, yeah. Right? Pleasure is not the end-all, be-all of this world, or really the world that we will become. And that's kind of the point. And of course, we can say that everyone's a sinner. We all sin. Obviously, that's the case, right? Which, praise God, we have a sacrament we can go to and receive out of mercy. Great. Awesome. Right? But also we have to gauge, too, is like, how do we do in our conversion in that? Right? We always want to gauge that as well. It's like, okay, we cross that we're going to fall. That's going to happen. But the question, are we trying to get better in our doing what God is for us? And that's why I really do appreciate that book, Living the Truth in Love, because, or you also, there's a great video called Joy of the Everlasting Hills, I think it's the name of it. And it gives these great tutorials about men and women who experience same-sex attraction, and they find this great joy in chastity. They've lived these very, like, really hedonistic lives, and they see the good in giving themselves to that way. But that's still, I mean, what I think we have to understand is that's the chastity we're all called to, no matter what. Where life we find ourselves in. That's the idea. You got a question, Alan? Oh, okay. Okay. I mean, that's kind of the base of this. And we can start talking, I mean, from there you kind of start talking about like transgender, get into that a little bit more. That might be a whole other topic, though, unless there are any questions on the topic now. I mean, because one, it's funny, you know, living with a canon lawyer, he tends to put out certain scenarios, right? So one of the scenarios is such that let's say you have a transgender man, a transgender woman, who want to engage in marital act. Can they?
Yeah. Well, it depends. You get, okay, so essentially, you can be transgender and some people choose to get a surgery.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that will just do that. Other people.
Well, wait,
But is that
hold on.
effective?
Hold on. So once you get the surgery, you can't.
No, well, actually, that's not true. No, so you can't. Once you get the surgery, it depends what type specifically. For example, like there's something on, I know, like on my Twitter that popped up 2 days ago, and essentially what ended up happening was there was a transgender, they had transitioned to male, okay? Essentially, this individual was raped, okay?
Okay.
They got pregnant because although they had
Right,
this
they're-
part,
yeah.
still, the surgery didn't get rid of everything.
Yeah,
essentially.
right, yeah.
They ended up getting pregnant, and essentially, you would kill them. But theoretically, like, I'm sure there's a way, like, they could manipulate.
So if you were to fully transition, there's really currently
What
no.
defines fully transition?
Well, to me,
You know?
like completely have like surgery to the point where you completely get rid of your male or female genitalia, right?
I don't know.
I think it's very
I don't know
rare.
exactly where
to be
surgery
functional.
is. How
Well,
much they
that's
get rid
what
of.
I mean. This is what I was looking up earlier, and they don't have a point say that you can completely transition fully.
But I think for a lot of people, though, too, it's not. It's like once they reach, like they have like a month, and that's like what they consider really what they want. So, for example, some people say like, some people will be like, for example, like if they're transgender, they're a woman, they would be male, like they're a man, they would be like, and then they're actually a woman. They're like, okay, like I don't want essentially their penis. They don't want it, okay? And then once they have that, and like that's all. That's the only thing that really like keeps them from reaching that point. But other people, it doesn't necessarily bug them. They just want the hormones. You know.
Okay, but so that's why I think there may be we need to have a whole different topic on that. But really, the point is you're mutilating yourself.
I mean, a lot of things.
Right, and then you're right. So there's a willful mutilation, and there's a mutilation that happens accidentally.
Yeah, that's why drug addicts will try to get off drugs.
Oh, sorry, what?
I mean, like piercing your ears is mutilation. I mean, you have to find
Okay,
that.
but would so if you were to pierce your ears, would that change your genetic makeup of who you are?
And if that's the goal, though, and to a certain degree, I think they still consider themselves the exact same.
Yeah, and that's why I think we need to make a distinction between gender and sex.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
Sexuality.
yeah,
Is very
right. So there's two different topics where I was talking about there. So, like I said, one of the topics was can a transgender man, let's say they're post-op, right? Can they actually engage in the marital act? Can they have a child? And currently, the current biological, anatomical answer to that would be, well, no. There's not a way for them actually to engage in the marital act. Mutilation to their genitalia, right? So can they get married? Well, the answer to that would be no. Right?
Well, I mean, not sure.
There's a couple that recently got this.
Well, you can marry a sheep if you want to,
But
that's not a sacramental marriage.
we always have to look. We always have to look at though,
No,
like
it's-
what level
You can
of
marry a cow
transition are they? And that's really I think we have to
We're
really
free.
be careful about that. Right?
Yeah.
But it's not
What,
sacramental.
the point is what they identify as, and it can be a personal thing.
See, and that's where I think I would disagree, because what you identify as really has no bearing on that issue.
But there's also a difference as well. They say the gender and sex.
Mm,
They,
yeah.
a lot of them will identify. They're like, okay, look, like I was born a female.
Yeah.
And they don't deny that.
Yeah, because that brings up another
They are their gender.
right. So that brings up an interesting topic, because let's say you had a transgender man, transgender woman who haven't gone through the surgery. Could they get married? And the answer is, well, technically, yeah, right. So it raises some very interesting points when it comes to
So I have a question.
theology. Yeah.
So then theoretically, let's say that it's a male, and then let's just say that they're born a female,
Mhm.
but they identify as male.
Yeah.
They decided that they don't necessarily want to do their genetics, like they don't want to do that. Okay. They are okay with keeping it because they're like, okay, I can have kids, whatever.
Mhm.
This is we can have kids naturally. That's fine. That's what I want to have my own biological kids, whatever. Okay. Is that considered male or female?
Yeah.
As long as, but then let's say that they identify and they theoretically take hormones.
Yes. So so the question is, do they have the potential to actually have children?
No.
And
Is
they're
it
doing that.
considered okay? Like,
Oh, well, so are you asking me if I, as a priest, if they came to me and said this to me, would I witness their marriage? I could.
so essentially, the church doesn't say that you can't identify. as
Well,
a-
what the church would say is, in that respect, what I could say is, well, is there some psychological issue going on which would actually not give you complete capability to say yes to what you're saying yes to?
No, if you would like same-sex marriage is procreation.
No, it's not just procreation, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Is that all three aspects of the ends of marriage, the unitive, the procreative, and the sacramental, are not met between two people of the same sex.
What's the
So unitive is the complementary between man and woman become one flesh. Right?
what's the second?
Sacramental is a covenant with God. So basically, the first two need to be met in order to be sacramental.
So essentially, you're saying without the procreative side of the other two, it's mutually the other two.
So what I'm saying is, sacramentality is based on the fact that the matter is present,
So
Right.
essentially, they're not a man and a woman, therefore it can't be.
Right.
So it's just like the rule, therefore.
Well, it's not necessarily a rule. It's really ordained by God. I mean, that's not my rule. it's a divine rule, right? So, in other words, the matter has to be present. The unitive aspect has to be present. The procreative has to be covered, and it has to be covenantal, meaning the two have to be baptized, for it to be sacramental. Okay. If you look at the last months, we talked about this in the last month. It's on YouTube. You can check it out. We do talk about what the ends of marriage are in that, and that's really what we're getting at. Is that we have a man, two men, two women, none of those aspects are there to actually say it's marriage.
And that's why the church doesn't believe in vitro either. It's like you can do all sorts of scientific
So in
experiments.
vitro is a little different because what the question there is, can a artificial act? And the answer to that is yes. The fact that in vitro is artificial really has no bearing on the actual issue itself, on the fact of procreation itself. The problem with in vitro is that you're removing the unitive and the procreative aspect of the marital act completely. So in other words, you're taking the sperm, you're taking the egg, you're putting it in a glass tube. In vitro means in glass, and you're combining them. But the other problem that's really makes it even worse is that with the current process the way it's going, you by definition have to either abort certain embryos, not considered.
Because like the church has this teaching where like as soon as like the sperm and the egg are connected to the child, it's like life.
Yeah.
And like the life takes place. But in the Bible, it doesn't ever actually say that like it's a life, or I'm not gonna like really off topic. I know.
Well, to be
But I have a question just because
Yeah.
of like the in vitro process and stuff. And the only thing it says it says that like when the woman, if she were to have like a miscarriage, she must father to her husband as if like he owns it and it's not a life.
that's really dealing more with purification, right? So the whole issue there is the problem with the stillbirth is there's blood involved, right? So that is we offer. There's purification because you're touching blood. Natural child. There's always a purification process when a child's born because there's blood involved. Right?
We're sensitive about blood.
But Paul is also very and also in Corinthians.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Actually, he's not so much. If you read the original Greek, you actually read everything in context. It's really not that sexist.
Love your wives, wives obey your husband.
No, he doesn't. Actually, that's actually a misconception.
Is it a translation?
It's a translation issue.
Okay, then I feel better.
It's not
I was like,
obey.
That's really
Right.
aggressive.
What he says is subordinate. But what actually is a bad transition? No, well, because the Greek because Statia.
What does that mean?
Okay, so is anyone ever heard
Hypo
the
is
term
below.
hypo is below?
Statia is condition or state.
Stand.
Stasis.
Stand.
State.
Stands
So
below.
stands under. Well, okay, so where do you also hear? There's a theological term used, hypostatic union. You ever hear that?
Sure.
What's hypostatic union?
The divine and human natures and
Of Jesus Christ, right? So by definition, one has to be the support, the foundation of the other, right? That's the divine supporting the human.
The neck turning the head.
Yeah. So what he's saying is, really, it is the foundation of the marriage.
Look at that, my wedding too.
Not you don't look at it as below; is it supporting? Well, they are because if you read the next line, what he says is, "Hey, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church." Well, what did Jesus do for his church?
Died for his
He died for his church.
It just doesn't sound like equality. It sounds
Well,
like
personally, I think the guy's getting a worse deal.
Yeah. You're right. It's not equality.
Husband, it's a laundry. That's what it means.
You can't get away from
laundry.
nature.
The dinner.
You can't get away from nature. That's a flower. It's a flower.
What
It's-
Paul is telling you to do is that what some wives do. Say, support your husbands.
Probably
Which is what you should do.
really
And he's telling
down
husbands,
that.
hey, you know what? You got to die for your wife. You've got to give yourself completely to the point where you go to death
No,
for
it's
your
great.
wife.
See, it's not just being submissive, you
It's the same way, all right.
Well, see, submissive is different. Submissive is different.
The fact that he had to say
It is not
means that
submissio.
nobody really
It's
was doing
substantia.
that.
Hypostasia.
Washing machine floor.
Yeah. Thank you.
But it sounds like
Oh,
what
more
Mary
than
Beth
two
asked you is kind of the church says, since there's no. What did you say?
So you're talking about
Since there's
in vitro, right?
potential,
Yeah.
Since there's no.
So the thing, what the church
Really, since the
again,
natures are complementary.
well,
it's
are talking about,
it's
talking
not
about
the
for
way we know from nature what God designed.
right.
It's
Well, there are
obvious.
considerable amounts of species actually that have homosexual tendencies, like 150 something.
Yeah, but they also don't have the gift of reason. That's one of the things that
That's
separates
not
them from the
necessarily
animals.
true.
Oh yes,
There are levels.
no,
to it.
no animal has the gift of intellect that the humans have.
Yeah,
They
because
have instinct. They have instinct.
That
Sure.
neurons, they
but their life is.
maybe the one that makes you human. And I'm not saying necessarily that we're not at a different level. I don't know, whatever. But to a certain degree, there are it's like, for example, like processing the neurological pathways that humans have.
Mhm.
Okay, like for example, elephants, whales, dolphins, primates all have almost completely identical.
So what?
That's
yeah,
one of the
right, that's
last-
biological. But what? Here's the question:
And it's conversely
Can an
evolved.
elephant
Well,
or a
not
dolphin can they contemplate their own existence?
We don't know.
But that's the thing.
I don't speak
Like, you
dolphin.
can't,
Right.
you
Can they
can't-
put a man on the moon? I mean, there's
You
no way.
can't prove otherwise.
Well, what we can go is what we have experience.
I mean, they have. I mean, when we look at their like groups, like this is the fascinating.
Can they tease out the DNA material in a cell?
But that's the fascinating thing too when we talk about like these groups, like for example, like elephants. Okay,
Or just on a
they
different
mourn
level?
when members of the community are lost. They have like
So
wars
what-
with other groups.
Right,
They
and
have
so the
community
question you have to ask
burial
is, well, so I would say that warring by its definition is not reasonable.
Well, humans do that sometimes,
I know,
so we're
but
not
that doesn't
reasonable
seem
either.
that seem reasonable. I'm just saying we have the capacity to actually choose to war, choose not to war.
But you can say that. I mean,
Well, but the question is it instinct or intellect?
well, what is it?
No,
I mean,
we actually have a capacity that an animal doesn't have.
what minus God giving us proves that we don't.
Well, okay, so
What
Let's
proves
go-
that we have reason?
so here's the thing.
What
You're
proves
saying that
we have something to think of. And
Bernie, we are able to live in the land or on the sea.
And that's great, but I'm saying
so what you're saying is
Say
so
that
okay, so you're
evolutionary
taking
thing
you're taking the
somehow.
empirical, the materialist standpoint, right? So what you're saying is prove it. Well, what I can tell you though is that science, as a scientist, I can tell you, science cannot prove nor disprove the existence of God. There are limits to science that we just can't know.
But I'm saying that we can't necessarily prove different.
What do you do today? Faith. It's not.
Well,
Which is honestly
all we can
reason
do is go by what we actually have evidence of. And so we have evidence of a civilization being built. Now, if you want to say that
But
we
I
can
mean,
maybe that an animal can maybe evolve into that, well, you can say Darwin, sure. Okay, we can actually see how Darwin actually could say that there was some development of humanity that we can look within God's plan.
Honestly, I think that humans can be so special. Okay, here's just a theory. Just a theory.
Prove it.
Okay, I don't necessarily. I'm not saying that I have enough evidence yet, and I need to read more on it. But I think that an interesting theory is the idea that humans believe like we are somehow like less and more intellect or something like that as part of maybe like it's like an evolutionary thing where it's like because we believe that it allows us to advance our species farther because we now believe that somehow we have domain over the earth and therefore we have the right to take it. It's like we don't feel more.
Okay, domain or dominion. So, okay, again, there's distinction, right? Domain doesn't mean like you dominate.
No.
Dominion means you are actually a steward of.
But it's like although to a certain degree we still like feel like we have like the right. It's like when you feel that you're. I mean, to a certain degree, maybe not all humans are like this, but like generally, like when you put yourself on a pedestal, are you able to, look at the repercussions less? I guess.
I mean, the fox species hasn't put a man on the moon. They haven't created
But that
irrigation
doesn't
ditches.
necessarily mean that they don't have reason.
They-
Just because they haven't then as quote
You're
unquote
saying, are they
successful.
just living in nature? Have they had their day?
We have
and
an
they just
opposable
realized
thumb, and
that-
that's been extremely, we've had some things, but how do you define it?
So
What
I would
other
say-
animals are stronger, faster?
So
than us?
reason is a philosophical term.
Okay, well, how would you define it?
Reason is a gift given to actually think about oneself or about and contemplate things that are higher than yourself. That's a philosophical term.
Okay, so then who's to say that they honestly, I mean, like, how do you know?
Because they don't demonstrate any evidence.
What do you do? They have languages.
They do have language.
They have languages. I mean,
Yes.
What does it
They
say?
have communities. They more.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So that's to say that a higher
That's
being.
considerable.
So that's
amount
not
of
saying that a higher species or higher being can't be formed from a lower, right? I mean, I think that's where kind of. So that's where Darwin comes into play, saying that a lot of human species we have developed over time from these different lower species. There's a possibility of that materially, but we would hold though that intellect is a divine gift.
Elephants develop a neutron that makes us see. This is neutron. They turn into like
You could say neutron.
No. Neuron. Sorry,
Neuron?
there's this neuron.
Neuron.
I can't remember what it's called. It's named after this one neuroscientist. Basically, it's termed as the neuron that makes you think. Okay, it was like the thing that like allowed us to like think.
Okay, you're talking about the God gene.
I can't remember. No, it's not a gene.
I would say that
Neuron.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called. I can look it up.
Okay, I would
But
say
they
though,
found
but
it.
see, I think that's the thing is we're talking about a scientific realm and trying to talk about a philosophical term. You can't really combine those. So we can talk about scientific. Yeah, there could be developed materially.
At a higher level.
My point
Right.
is they
There could be-
developed convergence.
There could be a material. You can talk about material development of the human DNA, human biology that could come from a lesser being. Okay, we can hold that.
Like we were evolved far, like we're in the same family as primates, right? But we're not. But elephants developed that neurological pathway. Like,
Okay, so here's my
convergence.
question. Here's a question then. Angels. Angels.
I don't.
You don't believe in angels?
No.
Okay. So angels are an intellectual being, right? They don't have a body. They're not bodily. Given intellect, where they get their intellect if they have no
You're
corporeal.
saying that we need proof, but then suddenly we gotta prove that they're angels.
Well, we go to a character named Saint Gabriel.
That doesn't mean that there's angels. It means that humans believe there are. I mean,
This is a different conversation. This is a different conversation.
No, I'm just saying. I'm
Yeah.
saying if we're going on the basis that we still need more evidence, then.
Well, so I'm not. That's what I'm saying, though. I think what I'm saying is, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but the problem is, I don't think we'll ever get that evidence. And so the reason being is because science can only go so far. Science, just like philosophy, has a barrier. It has a boundary, right? They say you're swimming. What's that?
Well, I mean, like,
So does knowledge.
Yeah. So a lot of this we're talking about is like, okay, yeah, you can say that.
There have been lots of people over the millennia who said, I'm going to figure X factor.
The gene. Well, there could also be certain, science and stuff that comes out in the future. Might be. Because a lot of it's conflicting. You always have to look at everything together in context with each other, right?
So does it get reduced to just simple pleasure?
Well, I think a lot of that is what it comes down to. Okay. I think what we look at it is, if you yourself or anyone else down to just the pleasure you're getting from them, that's using them for something that's not what they're designed or going to do. We're not called to use people for anything, right? Each person is an end in themselves. They're a body and a soul, right? So it's important to kind of keep that in mind, because I think a lot of times, whether it be same-sex attraction or just premarital sex, whatever it may be, what it falls down to is I'm reducing myself to something that's lesser than me as a person. And I'm reducing someone else lesser than me. I don't necessarily think it's even I don't even think it's necessarily like a God thing. I think because we have many atheists that actually can live very moral lives, right? So it's really just looking at another person as a fellow human being and saying, I think there's something in you that's common with me, and I should treat you as I would myself. Yeah. And there's even good Christians that do. I mean, Christians do that too. I mean, really, it comes down to treat others as you'll be treated. And you don't necessarily have to believe in God to actually hold that to be true. That's self-evident, right? Then once you know what those terms mean, you know what that whole premise is. Right. It's a natural law. I mean, you could also be that in your own marriage. You can be unchaste in your marriage, sure. If you're reducing your husband or your wife down just to the pleasure you get from them, well, that's not chaste. That's not looking at the other as another human being, especially someone that you love.
And that applies to everything.
Yeah.
You use people for money or
Sure.
a ride in their car, whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah, it's not good.
so when we're around people like at work,
So here's the thing. I wouldn't say. I mean, practically speaking, of course, right? We're called to
we
love.
are bigoted.
We're called to love everybody. We're called to love everyone, no matter who they are,
bigots,
or where they are.
ignorant.
But I think also,
bigots.
sure. But I think also, what there's a difference between. I think also we get this kind of confused too. There's a difference between acceptance and tolerance.
Yeah.
So tolerance is basically
That's
acknowledgement.
right there.
It's an acknowledgement of the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't mean you have to actually have to accept it. Right. So in other words, I can have, and I know I've had peers and friends of mine that are same-sex attracted, and I love them. Yeah, I love them as a human being. I don't agree with everything they do, but I'm still called to love them. Either way, I think that's where the dividing line is. Sometimes we just set these, and that's I think another problem. We set these political lines where it's either you on this side or this side, and that's not the case, right? And the church has always advocated that, is that we're all called to love and look at each other as fellow human beings, children of God, and love them because of that. Now, that doesn't mean we can't admonish or say, you know what, you're living this lifestyle. I don't know if that's really the best thing for you. And here's why.
I wouldn't do that at work.
Well, see, it comes down.
Sounds like a really bad idea.
It comes down to levels of friendship, though, right? That's what it comes down to, right? The levels of friendship we're talking about. So yeah, if I were in a utilitarian friendship with a coworker, yeah, you know what? That's something that's really not in my purview with that friend. Right? Doesn't mean I can't be friends with them or can't love them, but okay, that's where our boundary is in our friendship, right? But if I had someone in that third level of friendship that I do, that I really love and care for, I almost have an obligation to say, you know what, you're living this life, and I don't know if that's really the best thing for you. Why?
Well, remember when you're living your life wrong.
Okay, don't pull up some of the
Okay,
new
but they
stuff.
were trying to stone someone because of heterosexual Pentecost, something like that.
Yeah, that's in the gospel.
Right. And Jesus was like, whoever has sin, he's the first
Right.
to
That's
cast
the
a stone.
first
Correct.
one,
And nobody can stone.
But okay,
Yeah,
but Merv, what did he tell her after that? Go and sin no more.
Go and sin no more.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying though. So the point is, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Is the point is we're all on the same playing field here. We're all We're all sinners. We're all made in the image of likes of God. Therefore, we should all treat each other that way.
But that was kind of Jesus' absolute.
Exactly.
Go and sin no more. I mean,
But that doesn't mean that we can't say, you know what? Hey, that's not really the best thing for you.
he told the woman at the well the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, there's this
Remember?
woman, and I
She had
disagree with
6
her
or
on almost
7
everything politically,
things.
socially, philosophically, but I love that. She's like the nicest person ever. Okay, I don't know if you guys know this. She always says, point it and what's your point and goal of conversation? Is your goal to win the argument, or is your goal to open the mind? And not if you're going to make it they're living wrong lifestyle. I think that's usually affecting my but usually telling people that they live the wrong life is not convincing them of anything.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
It's just
Right.
filling your
you're
moral
not getting
feeling
anything out.
of
No, but that's what I'm trying to get at. Is the point is right, and the point is though is trying to understand from your perspective why it is. And again, it's not going to be convincing. Yes, but I think oftentimes what the problem is that we're not actually talking about the reasons why things are the way they are. It's more like what we're talking about is like you shouldn't do that. And yeah, that's not effective. right? That's not effective. So the goal is, like you said, open the mind. Okay, I see you doing this, and it pains me because I think you should. I think it's causing you harm in this way. Well, if that person is my true friend, if I really care that much about that person, then what do you mean?
Very bad. Either way.
When if a glutton is eating too much, they will experience the pleasure like them, but it's better to, enjoy them, or somebody who goes nuts with their credit card. You need to stop because that credit card bill is going to come. You're going to get sick from ingesting something that's too much alcohol, too much food, too much anything.
What's the
You know?
negative consequence?
Well, actually, there's a lot.
I'd love to
Yeah.
Actually,
Lots of
there's
cancer,
actually physical like cancer,
get
anal
that from
fissures.
heterosexual-
but it's actually more prevalent from
Yeah.
homosexual.
No, the numbers. It's
Considerable amounts of negative.
I mean, there's also
You can get
actually
STIs.
you're more prone to domestic abuse, drug abuse. Yeah, there's actually
And
data
why
out
do you
there.
think that is?
Well, I don't know, but that's what the kind of what the stats are kind of showing. You're more prone to actually experience that in same-sex attraction than if you don't.
My question is, how do people correlate?
Well.
And
So what
This
the question
society
is.
in which
So
I know
again,
that we act like society is
the
hyper-accepting,
correlation is
but until maybe a few weeks ago, you could get fired from your job in plenty of states for being LGBT
Well,
and no other.
I don't know if that's the case, really, practically speaking. But yeah, you're right. There's laws on the books now that says you can't do that. But I don't necessarily. Whereas working in the corporate world, I don't know if that would have been the case anyway.
Yeah, it might not have been true from may now be true from a legal standpoint, but it certainly was not true. It was true also from a practical standpoint.
Right.
I think
Yeah, it wasn't de facto. I've been working for 40
I mean,
years.
it was
Yeah.
still a thing. There was
Right?
some
Yeah.
discrimination.
No,
You can't deny that
It's
there
never
was.
been de facto.
I think it depends on what state you live in. Talk to Daryl. He's in Oklahoma.
You
He
can
will tell
find
you
one little
stories of
article
stuff
in a
happening
newspaper.
Oklahoma.
In the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, what a lot of times what would happen is gay bars, or well, that was before the 70s and 80s. Some gay bars and people like that. They would raid them, and then they would stick all people's names in papers that
Well,
on fire.
Well, I don't know. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I never heard that, but I don't know. I could be.
Oh, we were reading that section of the paper back then.
Your name wasn't up on that wall.
Yeah.
Saying that's what they would do. They'd stick your name in the paper and your
Well, it's
lawyer
50s, 60s, or 70s, or 80s. Which one is it?
I'm sorry, because I realized the 70s is kind of like,
Sexual
what was it,
revolution.
60s, yeah, sexual revolution. Do that. They stick your name in the paper.
Well, I think that's the same argument that you could all look at presentism all day, right? Try to take higher standards based on our 21st century understanding. That's still wrong. We shouldn't want to. We don't want to look back on history and say they really should have known this. They didn't.
Still considerable numbers.
I don't know if you can say practically the same today as you could. Yeah, maybe
Well,
right.
it's not
Maybe
the
I
same.
could
It
think
used to be
sure.
much
Maybe
worse,
they
but
could
it's
be.
extreme.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they could be. I'm not
The
sure.
greatest minority cult is
I don't know.
suicide rates considerably higher.
Well, okay.
Real.
There's other data. I think this has to be another topic. We can talk about that next time, probably.
Talk about the data.
Yeah, because there is other data out there, but we can talk about that. Anyway, same-sex attraction. So yeah, I mean, there are other physical and mental and psychological. So what is causing a correlation? Well, that's just again because this is all inclusive. There's not enough data out there where we can actually say yes or no. But there is tendencies more prone to these things. True, but the current data that's out there is showing that if you are in a same-sex attraction, in general, right, you're probably more prone to experience it.
Not looking at the size society.
Well, so if you want to look at that, then you look at Denmark and Sweden and some of the other Scandinavian countries where this data is coming from, and it's still the same even there.
Oh, and it's worse in the third world. Oh,
So a lot of the data that's coming
vicious.
from a
I lived in Ecuador for a year.
yeah,
They were vicious.
it's from an environment where that lifestyle is actually more
It
accepted,
was-
and it's still showing that actually
It was. Oh, it
I
was
have
vicious.
Yeah. Okay.
That now there you would see workplace discrimination.
And again, I would say I
I'm not
also
hiring
want
you,
to. I always
get out of
want to.
here, You're a whatever.
I want to preface that you're right. That a lot of this data is inconclusive. It is. That we don't have enough to really say. So, but you're. Are you?
Correlation
Yeah.
is not high.
All right. Any other questions or comments or discussion on same-sex attraction?
Sorry.
You guys have all been so fine.
Well, it's been a good discussion. It's good. Yeah, it's good conversation.
How old are you guys?
18, 14, 12.
It's a
What
different
do you
dynamic.
think? What do you
Yeah.
hear?
I think you have to take things very bad. Connected very much. I mean, we don't like you. You can be married here.
I
Yeah,
have a question about
That's
that.
and what. I answer her real quick. Respond to that. So that's why Courage. So Courage is it's courage.org. It's an arm of the Catholic Church that is a ministry to men and women experiencing same-sex attraction. And really, what it tries to promote is chastity. And it's really a great organization, a great program, and it actually is effective. And so that's where you're kind of seeing these obstacles being overcome. Where it's being promoted that, oh yeah, no wait, this is not. We still love you, right? You're more than just your sexuality, and that's what it tries to promote is the whole human person. That's what I'm sorry.
Another.
Okay, with the new standard that was put up, and let's not even
Okay, what standard are you talking about?
Yeah. Well,
the new standard that says that this field essentially can't discriminate based on gender expression and sexuality.
oh, that's Supreme Court ruling. Yeah.
How does that have jurisdiction? So, for example, like the church is still facing the jurisdiction of not.
Yeah, because we are exempted by the First Amendment.
Does the government say that?
First Amendment says that.
No. But I'm saying, like, for example, like, if that got, like, has there been, like, a case yet where, essentially, since that standard has been set, and I'm not saying, like, oh, like, I mean, like, has the Supreme Court yet to say if churches are still,
Well, So
Yes.
you're saying the Supreme Court has.
they said they can still say,
You're saying the Supreme Court has jurisdiction in the church.
well, okay, I'm saying our opinions on law right now, let's just have it. Has the Supreme Court said a church, like, has there been a specific case in which, let's say a church was to say, because this, that, like, has there been a case yet where the Supreme
Oh,
Court
no.
said that there's yet to be a case
No.
yet?
As far as I know, no. And I think the one of the things that's what made it so kind of interesting to actually decided that was because it was based on the Civil Rights Act, right? They basically included that as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which really didn't have any. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with it. I mean, yeah, I don't think anyone should be discriminated based on whatever they do. Again, we're all called to love. That means we're all called to tolerate, not necessarily accept. I get that. But yeah, so there's been no specific case. I mean, it's amazing actually we haven't had one where someone has been.
Coming up.
Well, you would think that, but that's
But I don't think that was the point of the act.
I don't know.
Maybe, I think it was more like job discrimination, healthcare,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
And I don't know if there are any specific cases about that were brought up. I don't know, but
I'm
I
just
think,
curious.
but there has been no
And
case as far as I
agree
know
with
as far as
it,
that's
I'm curious
concerned. But
that
also
was another
gay
reason.
marriage has been in effect since 2012. We haven't actually any issues with that either. That's
2012 has it been that long?
It's been about that long. Was 2013? Was the gay marriage was allowed by the Supreme Court? Yeah. So it's been a while. So I mean, the fact we actually haven't had any issues, I think that's kind of show that either maybe they think because we are protected by the First Amendment, it's really probably not started. But the fact we haven't actually had any cases, I think that's kind of. Herb, you have something? We don't think it works. Yeah, conversion therapy is never. So that's the other thing too. I think a lot of times people think the church is anti-science. We're not, right? But we also understand there's a difference between science and theology and philosophy. Everyone has their swim lanes where they actually have their boundaries. Yeah, the church never advocated for conversion.
Well,
The Universal Church has never put out that actually is a
there
decade.
have been.
So, such
Haven't
as?
there been like not like
Make sure this isn't made up stuff you read on
no,
Twitter.
we get lost.
Okay.
The
All right.
church has done. What's that? I mean, the church has done some nonsense.
I mean, the NFL is prosecuting.
Conversion data, yes, but I
Jackson.
yeah. So it's basically
Jaquan Jackson is the wide receiver.
it's a practice of like sending someone like pray the gay away or like put them through like shock therapy. You know, get rid of that aspect. The church has never advocated that.
Hitler said.
Now there may be individuals say, yeah, that could work, it couldn't work, maybe, but the church has never universally said
Put it on
that.
Twitter.
Well, and I think that's a confusing piece too, because you do have individuals in any large organization who advocate for something and they forget to take off their hat as a priest, as a nun, as a professor at a Catholic university, as a bishop. You know,
Well, fortunately, that's one thing that we always have everything written down. That's where the reason we have a catechism. It actually shows that to the church teaches. Now, doing everything in practice, a lot of that comes up to individual application, right? So that's not to say there maybe not individuals who said, yeah, this could work, but it's never been universally promulgated. Yeah.
Okay, what about like the Middle Ages? This is going back. The Middle Ages, how was I have not educated myself enough about that. But I know people like you know what I mean, like well did the church make major mistakes then in saying things as well?
So the church has never erred in teaching. Universal. So you have to look at universal
Have they
teaching.
used violence or
Well, okay, can you give me a specific example?
like for example, like you know, like they would kill their
So
or burn witches.
Dr. Thomas Mann is a Christian here. That's not good. He's the director of medieval studies at St. Louis University. So what you're getting at, I think, is the Inquisition. Right, that's what we're talking about.
yeah.
So the church has never actually said this is a punishment. Any punishment that was given out was always done by a temporal authority, meaning the king, queen, whatever. Right?
The use of Franciscans, didn't they? The Franciscans
For the Inquisition. But what the Inquisition was for was saying, okay, well, is there heresy involved in this? And the church say, well, yeah, this is either heretical or not heretical. They were never charged though with giving out punishment. Well, but then again, the church since the 3rd century has always maintained a separation of church and state. It has papal states and it's been thrown in certain churches. But the church has never come out and said, yeah, you should kill this person, take that.
I'm sure I can find out.
Okay,
That's
but
not-
you have to look at, so I would talk to Dr. Thomas Mann about that. He can educate you much more than
I
I
don't
can.
know. I took his class in college.
Yeah.
It wasn't super good.
Really?
He was. I had friends who literally were in the process of converting and decided not to do that.
Interesting.
I'm just saying, I
Was
know.
this after his conversion or before his
What's that?
conversion? Was this after his conversion or before his conversion?
I saw him that semester at Mass. Like
Okay.
I went to Mass here one morning, and I was a little bit surprised. I don't know when he converted.
I'm not saying the church loses all validity, but to say that they didn't allow those things,
Well, I
would be
think the
incorrect.
question, though, would be, did the church condone? I don't know if you can really say that.
and they definitely got involved in politics.
Okay, but
They
again,
tried to gain.
I think you need to
tried
look
gain
at
control of politics.
certainly that is not that they were actually trying to. It's like the papal states, right? It was given to the church as a gift they actually didn't want. The Pope at the time said, I don't want this. They said, well, you're not going to take it. Right? So a lot of times the church has come under secular authorities. Even in the recent centuries, in the 19th century, the Italian fascists kind of took over Rome and kind of controlled a lot of the political aspects.
But in Mexico,
Okay, but when presidents make mistakes as presidents, who do we blame? Who other than themselves?
So I would think the president.
A lot of
Yeah,
Okay?
okay.
You blame the United States. And, you know, I'm not saying the United States has to own up to those things that every single citizen necessarily do. Doesn't mean the United States is the worst country in the world. Ban a Trump here.
Right.
No. But the church is the same.
So I would agree with the fact that, but I would say
Has your father ever made a mistake?
Yeah, but
I
I'm
would
saying
make a
it's
distinction though
very-
between, but again, I would make a distinction between what
I would
individuals
go
have
to the
I
done
apologize.
and what the universal church has promulgated. There's a difference between those two, right?
I do every day.
I mean, so yeah, priests, deacons, bishops, popes have made mistakes. I'm not arguing that, but the question is, has the church ever promulgated something? Yes. And I don't think you can actually show that.
They have not. They have acted.
But they have actually said, okay, like the penalty for heresy should be death. There's never been a church document or a promulgation of doctrine to say that should be the case. Okay, that's fine. But I think what you'll find is a lot of that comes from secular authorities like these kings. Maybe popes have made that statement, but that's never been accepted universally as teaching.
It wasn't like part
It's
of a
just
council.
you can always make an argument that there's going to be individuals and an institution
Yeah.
that fight against
Oh, I
something.
agree with that.
But if
That's
the
right.
institution has documents that say something, you don't have to have the entire world signing on. When the institution creates a document, they create a document.
But I guess the question is from what authority they create the document. So let's if Bishop Archbishop Carlson puts out a document today and says, "Hey, I want to do this." Okay, well that has a pastoral application within his diocese. That's not necessarily universal doctrine.
But when it has negative consequences, is the church not going to be held responsible?
Well, I think the church has been held responsible for a lot of things, and they haven't apologized.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's certain law.
Okay. What I think what we're talking about though is two different things: individual actions compared to universal doctrine.
So you were talking about bishops, right? And, having like putting out a document and being like everyone in their diocese being supportive. How do you feel about some of the epistles that publish it? Like things like women should veil themselves or not wear makeup or whatever. Is that like
So-
pastoral
So
direction, or is that like,
So-
hey, we're going to pass this down and everyone should do
So if you read the letters of Paul, a lot of them are directed towards particular churches at a particular time for a particular reason,
it? Right,
right? And that's how you have to like read. Now, there's a lot of catechesis involved with that.
right.
He's justifying like certain things, but a lot of the directions he's given is always pastoral in nature.
Yeah, that's kind of how I take it
Right.
as well. And a friend of mine had brought up, he's like, Paul's a real problem for your faith. This person is not a Christian.
I don't see that.
And I was like, oh, and he's like, what about this? I think there was some debate over, there was some sort of prayer that was going to be said in Washington, and the fundamentalist Christians said a woman cannot read the prayer because it says this. Paul says
they can't
this,
read in church.
that a woman, and they were like, nope, we can't have a woman say this prayer. And I said, I think that's a pastoral.
So I think a lot of
Does that make it okay?
I think a lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters, they tend to not read everything in context.
Right.
That's one of the differences. Here's what Paul is actually saying for this reason, for this particular time, for whatever's going on in this particular
That's what I told this
area.
friend.
Right. Now there's a lot of he's saying like when he says like Jesus is Son of God. That's a catechetical
He
statement.
talks about the vine
Right.
and the branches.
Exactly,
And
right.
how that we're all part of the body.
Right. So all that stuff, there's catechetical. The same thing even with the Old Testament. A lot of people read the Old Testament and say, well, wait a minute. Okay, if Leviticus says you should take these people that are heretics and go out and kill them. Well, okay, but that's for a particular reason, for a particular time, for particular people, right? And so the same reason why it's funny we have someone and the Jewish person asked me if the thing about kosher laws. It's like, why don't we follow kosher anymore? My response says, so no one's saying you can't follow kosher. If any good practicing Catholic can follow kosher laws if they want to. But the reason why we don't say that's actually obligatory anymore is because, well, all that was directed towards temple worship, and it was really directed for a particular reason. Namely, that the people at the time found that when they saw these animals rolling around in their filth, they thought, maybe that's not a good thing for us to consume. Right? These pigs are rolling around in their own filth, these other critters are eating their own dung. Maybe we shouldn't really eat that, put it in our bodies. That might not be too sanitary for us, right? As science develops, we learn more and more. We can start saying, well, that really was for that particular time for a reason. And also, that was directed toward temple worship. Well, the temple is no longer here. And also, Jesus sacrificed himself. That was the expiation for all of those sacrifices, which is why we don't have to sacrifice in the temple anymore. Not to mention the fact we don't have a temple. So you always have to look in context of what the direction of that all that is, and what he's trying to say in context of everything else.
Still recognize prejudice, even within the context. Like, okay, does the church recognize that there's prejudice towards particular groups, even if they say within the context of it is true?
When like they say like David or Saul had to put the ban on a particular people, right? So yeah, okay, that was prejudice. Now is that direction from God? Well, we could say yeah, and we may ask, so why is that? Well, one could argue that at that time, the only thing that was understood by particular people or region was military might, and so that's how it was communicated. It'd be the same thing like parents when they talk to their children when they're like 2. That's much how they talk to their children when they're 18.
But I mean, like, for example, like, there's recognized, for example, like what we're talking about, even if there's a context and a reason for those, they can still recognize the idea that
Well, so I think,
he definitely had a bias.
but see, I think you have to look at that as what we're talking about is presentism, right? So what we're saying is working through a 21st century lens back on a first century application. And so we can say today, yeah, honestly, this is 21st century. Oh, that'd be kind of out of whack, now. But in the context of where he was at the time, that was widely universally accepted. So it's like, okay, based on the time and today, what's the main message he's trying to get at? Well, this is what he's really trying to say.
Maybe but even taking it out of a 21st perspective lens and just saying, okay, let's see women and men in this philosophical context.
So what? So you can. So what I
he was also trying
looking
to
at gender equality.
That was a,
so what I,
gender
okay, so
equality.
here's the question. So 400 years from now, would you want that same judgment applied to you based on their lens saying that 400 years from now?
What I'm saying is specific definitions of what we call equality. And you know what? That's fair. They can do that. And I'm not saying that it discredits the entire Bible. But can we not admit that the Bible has made prejudices?
Well, but again, I think you have to base that prejudice on the context of what's going on. So again, if you're saying through a 21st century lens,
so within the society,
sure.
we see it as, so if the society is sexist, then is it writing? Is that what we're saying?
So what we're saying is, did Paul, even the time he lived, based on what he understood and what he knew, would it be reasonable for him to say, you know what, we should hold a 21st century ideal of what equality should be, based on what he knew in the first century, right? That would be incredibly unfair. If we would say, if there were, if 500, right, if 500 years from now you had a group of people saying, yeah, those 21st century people, man, oh man, what a bunch of hate them. They should have known that in order to levitate, all you have to do is think really happy thoughts. They should have known that. Well, that's kind of ridiculous.
To a certain degree, I think it's still positive. If society is progresses to further.
So yeah, you're assuming as we understand as a society more and more things of morality.
Yeah. Still recognize prejudices, even if it wasn't the 400.
Sure, I think you could say that based on today's standards, we'd say that you probably would have different understandings. Well, but see, what you get into is what you're seeing nowadays, where everyone's looking back in the past with the 21st century lens and saying, "Oh, they should have known better," and you can't necessarily say that.
You can't always say that, no, but you can still recognize.
I think you can say
recognition, like recognizing. There's a difference between recognizing and apologizing, and saying that the entire course of history is true.
So, in order to apologize, you have to actually recognize that it was wrong. And so what I'm saying is that there would necessarily been a recognition of that wrong. And doesn't mean it's right. I'm just saying that they can't really judge that person based on something they didn't know. Oh, I think you can. We have the same thing when it comes to sin. You can't say someone sins unless they know it's a sin. If I see someone rob a bank, I can say, well, that's not a very good act to do. But I can't call that person a robber until he's a sin.
Whether or not. I mean, I would.
You can judge the act. You can't judge the person. Because I don't know if that person knows that's wrong or not.
I mean, that's a good question. But what if they don't think it's wrong?
Not for them.
That's what he's saying.
That's what I'm saying. If they don't think it's wrong, they can't be a sin for them.
Well, so is that like saying that if gay people
So that's the thing. We're making a distinction between
Yeah.
a moral act and a sin. Sin is always personal, meaning that the agent, the person doing the act, has to know it's wrong for it to be sin.
Right. So is
Right.
it not a sin if
Not for them.
they don't think it's wrong?
Yeah, I can't say that everyone engages in a same-sex attraction act is evil. I can't say that.
So if you don't believe that something is wrong, is it considered a sin? The difference between
So-
knowing what
so-
the church's teaching is and
Right.
believing that it's wrong.
So a
is
sin is a personal act, and there has to be a level of personal knowledge. That's different than a moral act. A moral act is objective.
So theoretically, let's say that you sin according to Catholic standards, but you believe it's right. But theoretically, in Catholic standards, you still would have.
It depends on so it depends on the formation of the context, right? So if I were to tell you, Bernie, if you were to go to shoot somebody in the head, that'd be a sin.
Well, I mean, but let's
Now we can discuss that if you have to have full understanding that. Well, see, that's because treating someone else less than human. That's why it's wrong, right? You're treating someone as an object, blah blah, right? Okay, I understand that's wrong. So if you were to do that, yeah, that'd be a sin for you because you understand that's a sin. And you do it anyway.
But I mean, for example, like exactly, like
So there's a difference
homosexuality.
between
Yeah.
knowledge
You
and
don't believe it.
Yeah, right. So so that's the thing is that for it to be sin, there has to be a level of knowledge. If there's not a knowledge there, it's not a sin.
But like people tell you it's wrong, but you
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Is there has to be there'll be a level of development, right?
have to believe that it's wrong.
Yeah.
For the Catholic Church. Okay, that's okay.
But for the person who's sitting there, the church would say objectively that's an immoral act.
And they would so like.
And here's the reason why. Right? No.
I'm just asking, like,
there's
if
a
you,
between-
if
okay.
you all good,
Okay, look,
you
there's-
don't
there's-
consider any of it wrong.
There's two ways here. You got a moral act
Okay,
and a sin,
all right.
right? And a moral act is an objective. There's a bad end. There's a bad intention or there's a bad circumstance. It makes it immoral, right? So in other words, let's say I'm flying a plane, and I decide, which in itself is not really a bad act, but I decide I'm just going to strike a nosedive here and run to the ground.
Well, I understand that, but what? This sounds bad. What? And I'm not necessarily going to like this, but what in the Catholic perspective? I know this is like it gets you to hell. Theoretically, okay? Like,
Okay, so in order to go to hell, you have to be in a state of mortal sin. And so to be in a state of mortal
you
sin,
have to
can I finish? talking? So to be in a state of mortal sin, there has to be a grave action, right? Something that's wrong. You have to know completely that it's wrong, and then you do it anyway, right?
So you have to believe that it's
You have to
wrong.
know it's wrong, yeah.
Wait a minute. Can you differentiate is not knowing and believing the same
Right.
thing?
So there's
And I think
a
that's where
level
you're
of
getting
full
at.
consent, right? Full knowledge and full consent, right? So in other words, I've studied the topic, I've done my due diligence, I figured out, this actually is a wrong act. But I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
That's
What
a
if
mortal
you
sin.
don't know?
Yeah. So the question is, what culpability is it? Is that the state of mortal sin? Well, I can't answer that. That's up to the individual's conscience, right? So to your point, this person has to believe it. Well, yeah, they have to believe it,
So
and they
in
still
order
do it.
for the church to consider it, you have
Right. Exactly.
to. Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's it.
But that's different than an immoral act. So that's why I make the distinction, because sometimes you think sin and moral act are the same thing. But sin is always personal. That's why I can't tell the person's conscience. Like in the confessional, if someone comes in the confessional, I'm assuming their confession is mortal because I don't know anything.
You really don't know.
I don't.
It's not like the people now.
Now that's not to say that I, as a priest, can't catechize, right, or shouldn't catechize. It's my job to form consciousness in that way and say, okay, if there's a moral question, I need to help form that and answer those questions. Right?
But it's not like the church is now like, well, I was there at like kind of certain age, like
Yeah. So the age of reason, right? So anyway, so let's say a baby was baptized at the age of 1. Let's say that baby dies. That baby's going to heaven. It's the same, right? Now, if they're at the age of reason, now the age of reason doesn't have to be 7. It could be 10. It could be 5. The
Very.
question is, can the person differentiate between right and wrong? That's the age of reason. So it may not be 7. It may not be 8.
They say at the age of like 3, a lot of kids start
Right. So, but do they know it's wrong though? That's the
by
question.
the age by the
I
age
know,
of
you're right.
Depends on your language.
it's actually
skills.
healthy for
When you
children.
can talk,
That's how you know their
you can
development.
Well, the question is, do they know it's wrong?
I don't know where I read that.
Or does it just get them out of
What
something?
time?
I can't remember that.
Well, yeah,
It's
then
actually helpful in
7:30
child
for
development.
mass and then after mass till
7:30.
Child development.
No, it's supposed to help.
Everybody lies.
This is so great.
We're all
9. It is. It is.
It is.
Just
Thank you for
sometimes
coming
we're
back.
clearer.
Well,
What?
but I think that's the thing is that's why he respects our free will.
Well,
That's what the gift is. I mean,
know,
because
but
you know,
I'm not smart enough to figure out.
well, and that's again, that's kind of where
You're a
where
judge.
he-
That's your problem.
That's right. I judge Mary Beth, and I'm confident in that. Everything else, I don't know.
Mom's mad. You're mad. You're like,